here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week is going to be the turn of this singer, bass player and songwriter Steve Almaas, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry, all that other groovy stuff. Was a member of the Suicide Commandos, also beat Rodeo, and has gone on to a solo career as well, which you can find, and I'll put in the notes below. So this is an interview with Steve that I did recently. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Steve, it's over to you.
I'm of that generation where I was 7 years old and saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and that completely, twice in my life, one positive and one negative, the world completely changed from one place to another. And that was the first one, and that was very positive. But the world was one way the day before, and the world was a completely different place the day after. Yes. And it was, I mean, you know, there's many just like me, but you saw that, and it was the greatest looking and sounding thing you had ever heard in your life, you know, and, you know, so much came out of the Beatles, like, for that. And I mean, even that, like, all their cover songs that they played, you know, they were Beatles songs to us, you know, like, Americans didn't know their own, you know, R&B music. White Americans didn't know their own R&B music. And so, you know, Please Mr. Postman was a Beatles song. Roll Over Beethoven was a Beatles song. Yes. You know, You Really Got a Hold on Me was a Beatles song. And then, you know, that opened you up to a lot of things later. You'd want to, like, find out, oh, they didn't write this. Where did this come from? And you'd search that music out. And it was a pretty big deal.
Did the Rolling Stones also have a sort of a big kind of impact in the sense of them coming along and also covering, you know, their early material was all covers virtually, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the Rolling Stones were very, very popular too. And I was never one of, I didn't actually know too many people that I always hear now about the rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but I loved them both, you know, and didn't really see any conflict in that. But
yes,
I would say, you know, the Beatles are just on a level that other mere mortals didn't exactly, you know, achieve. And I love the Rolling Stones and love the Kinks and the Who and all of the British invasion bands, and all of that music was my first music, you know.
Yes.
And,
did you ever get into those other kind of more soft pop or polished pop, like the Herman's
Hermits? Yes, they were very. You know, I had a great. When my daughter was small, her mother was Swiss, and she came back from spending like a month in Switzerland, and so she woke up really early, and we were visiting in Minnesota, and so we went out to the Minnesota State Fair at like 7 a.m, and we were like walking around up there, and at like 9 o'clock in the morning, there was this band shell, and there was Peter Noon was performing.
Excellent.
At 9 o'clock in the morning at the Minnesota State Fair. And you know what? He killed it. He was great. He sounded great. He looked great. He told like Davy Jones jokes and stuff. It was really good.
Nice.
So yes, I was a Hermits fan too.
I know there was just, and there was, I know people like the Dave Clark Five, who was, you know, I think he was probably the most sussed businessman in the world, actually. I think somehow he knew what he was doing, unlike everybody else in the music trade who got completely ruined. So were you...
Oh, go ahead.
No, I said, were your parents at all kind of interested in music? Because they'd obviously...
My mother was a classical music enthusiast and played the piano, and my father was Norwegian, and I came from Norway as an adult to Minnesota, so he was a folk music enthusiast, and you know, strummed a few chords on the guitar and bought a lot of like folk and country records.
Right.
So you know, I did get that influence from him. I mean, he first like played me Bob Dylan, and
There you go.
know,
that's quite a cool. That's a cool family, isn't it? Really,
and
let's face it.
A lot of good stuff that I heard. You know, Pete Seeger and the Weavers, and I mean, he brought home that "Will the Circle Be Unbroken" album with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band and all those, you know, country guys that I didn't know and stuff. And so, yeah, I heard a lot. I was really into all the top 40, all the radio music of the 60s, but then I heard that whole other side from him too.
Yes.
I really
you must have been sort of looking and seeing and experienced that kind of the change during the 60s, you know, because there wasn't pop culture before, say, 63, really, was there? There would be in the sort of...
Yeah, for us, I would say 64, and then it really blossomed in 65.
Yes.
And I was a little kid, but I was really paying attention, you know, from like 7, 8 years old. So, I mean, those are like experiences. I mean, imagine like hearing like those cellos and good vibrations like coming out of a transistor radio. I mean, I remember just thinking like what an amazing sound that was and stuff. And or Positively 4th Street is like a top 40 hit.
Yes.
Like what a weird song to be like a top 40 hit. You know, it was great. It was, and so many things like that pop music, you know, and then it was all mixed up, you know, with Frank Sinatra was having top 40 hits too, you know.
Yes, Elvis was having his comeback as well, wasn't he, at that stage? So that was kind of interesting. I mean, there was, I suppose, you know, because I missed it because I was born in 64, but I was often thinking what it must have been like to see things changing so rapidly each kind of year, and then sort of sounds that we had never heard before. I remember we had a DJ here called John Peel who did a show on a pirate station called The Perfume Garden, and you know, suddenly, my God, Jimi Hendrix, you know, listen to this guitar, you know, and you'd had Eric Clapton and Cream, and you'd had Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac and John Mayall's Blues Explosion. But, you know, suddenly Hendrix must have just been like, okay, this is, and, you know, and obviously Pete Townsend, seeing him at the Monterey Pop Festival. I mean, seeing all that happening so quickly, I just could imagine, you know, can only imagine it must have felt quite mind blown, really.
Yeah, the first kind of real rock concert I went to was The Who in 1969. I was 13, and they played in a 400 seat little theater in the Round in Minneapolis called the Guthrie Theater. And it still might be the loudest concert I ever went to.
Yes, my God, that must have been quite... And that's when they all had good knees and elbows and still
absolutely. Yeah, it was like, I think basically like they played that Live at Leeds set, you know, that came out on that record, and it was really good.
So the next year, no, that year there was Woodstock, wasn't there? Were you as literally as a teenager, 13, were you kind of aware of this kind of the youth movement? There was the sort of obviously the Vietnam War. You had, you know, civil rights, gay rights. You had people trying to get to the moon. They might have already got there, but you know, there must. You know, were you kind of aware? Like,
absolutely, and to much to my frustration, too young to quite get there. I heard of Woodstock. They had something else that was much closer to me. In 1969 was the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival,
right.
And I wanted to go to that so bad, you know, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, near Detroit. But there was no way. I mean, there was nobody that was old enough wanted to take 13-year-old me along to that.
No, just not going to happen.
But yes, aware of those things, and really. But then, like in 1970, like a venue opened up in Minneapolis called the Depot, which is, the place is still a venue called First Avenue that's pretty well known for like 40 years or something. But I started seeing bands there in like 1970, John Lee Hooker and Canned Heat, the Ike and Tina Turner Review, the Flying Burrito Brothers and the Mothers of Invention, Johnny Winters and Jay Giles, like all these shows, they would have them on Sunday nights. And those were all, they couldn't serve liquor in Minnesota on Sunday, so they were all ages. And, you know, I could get my dad to drive us down to the early shows for that. So that I started getting to see some really good stuff.
Yes. And what sort of tapped you or nudged you in the world that was the bass guitar? Was there a kind of anything that
Well, you know, we had a little basement band, and it was three of us playing guitars, and I had an acoustic guitar with a pickup in it to use it, you know, which wasn't that cool. The other two guys had proper electric guitars, and then there was an older brother band that also practiced in the same basement, and their bass player got a new bass, and so he was willing to sell the old one. So by default, because it was an electric instrument, I moved over to bass, and that's how I started playing.
Yes. Did he give you some lessons?
Not really. And it's funny, you know, bass playing was really confusing to me because the bass players I liked were like John Entwistle, Paul McCartney, a little bit later, Barry Oakley, the bass player in the Allman Brothers Band, and that guy in Yes, too, Chris. But anyway, all these really busy, they were busy bass players, and that was kind of hard to learn from, you know, but that's kind of or Jack Bruce, you know, or
yes, I mean,
it was a little it's funny when I was much older and like met some older players that you know, kind of were more, you know, like the bass might play with the bass drum and showed me about that. That was quite enlightening because when I started out, I was trying to be pretty busy on that bass.
yes, because I've done quite a few interviews with bass players. Like there's a guy called Barry Adamson who was in Magazine, which was one of those post-punk bands, and also Jar Wobble, who was in Public Image Limited, and both of them, I think, just kind of picked up the bass for various, I don't know why. They weren't really, they hadn't played. It was almost like, oh, have a go at this. And I think with their musical limitations, seemed to just go for a sound which was kind of very dub. You know, it's quite a dub sound because they weren't going to be going up and down the fretboard and sort of doing anything like John Entwistle. We used to always watch that little clip of him just, you know, doing things that made you just think,
it
wow.
was sick what he could do. Nobody plays like that, you know. It's like,
the ox, yes, it was something, but there was a musicality in those days. I mean, people would judge with their kind of ability to do very complicated thing and bend strings and I mean, and then obviously in the 70s when you were, you know, must have been very aware of that kind of rise of the kind of the prog rock guitarist and you know.
Yeah, that was it was a frustrating time. It was right after that when I left school, and I met the other two guys that would be the Suicide Commandos, and they were 2 years older than me, which was a lot at that time, you know, and they knew a lot. They knew a lot more about music than I did, and I started playing with them. And you know, the drummer had been to England, and he came back with John Cale and Roxy Music and Ducks Deluxe and these you know, some of the Dr. Feelgood, some of the pub rock bands and that stuff too. And that's the music that we started filling. You know, you had to play in bars, you had to play 4 sets. And so we started filling our sets with like songs from those records, you know. And as we Chris, the guitar player, was already writing songs, and you know, but that's where we kind of, in our own little corner of the world there, you know, started moving towards what became the punk rock sound.
Yes, well, God, that was a really interesting sort of, a moment to, because I was, you know, I've been listening to your, you know, music quite a bit recently, and it had that flavor, but I was a bit confused where that would have come from, and now you just explained it. It's like, oh, of course.
Well, and then just another very random thing, I moved into the basement of a school teacher's house down in Minneapolis. And it turns out her daughter had run off to New York with Johnny Thunders when the New York Dolls came and played in Minneapolis. And by the time I met her mother, she was living with Tommy Ramone.
Right.
And she's sending her mom like pictures and cassettes and stuff of the Ramones music and the pictures of Blondie and the Ramones and all television and all those people. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this looks like the greatest thing ever. We should go out there. And we called up CBGB's in the spring of 1976 from Minneapolis and said, can we come and play out there? And they, it was like a local bar. They couldn't believe that somebody from Minnesota wanted to come and play, but they said, sure. And then that started us going out there and kind of getting tapped into the New York scene and meeting those people and what they're doing. And that's, all started. The Modern Lovers record came out. That was a huge influence. And
television, I suppose.
Yeah, all of that.
Yes, it must have all exploded. Did before that, because in this country we had obviously glam rock, as I kind of mentioned earlier, and most of it is kind of like just normal rock bands, but with men dressed up in sort of kind of flamboyant clothing. And then you had people like David Bowie and
Bowie was big in my circle. People before punk, Bowie, Iggy and the Stooges, the Raw Power album, and the first New York Dolls record were kind of the big three. And sort of amongst the people I knew lumped in with that would probably be Alice Cooper. Although now I wouldn't really call his music in the same league as those other people I mentioned.
No.
But at the time he was kind of in the same thought of as in the same bunch.
Yes.
But yeah, Bowie was the most impressive, of course.
And had those kind of other kind of garage punk bands that all went on the Nuggets compilations like Blue Cheer, had they sort of come into your consciousness? Well,
that album that Lenny Kaye put together, Nuggets, it came out in that, yes. That was that was just like a bonk on the head of remembering all this music that we loved from the mid-60s.
Yes.
And it kind of, then all of a sudden you could forget about Wishbone Ash and the Climax Blues Band, and kind of concentrate on that. And that, our style of punk rock definitely came partly out of the garage band sound, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And when you were there in sort of 76, were you able to sort of get signed to a label quite quickly at that point?
Well, no. I mean, I guess in the scheme of things, time didn't move as quickly then, but we made our own, we made 2 independent singles that we just recorded and had pressed up and put out in 76 and 77. And then we met the filmmaker, Chuck Statler, had moved from Akron, Ohio to Minneapolis, and he was friends with Devo and had made those early Devo videos. And he made a little film for I guess they weren't videos, and they were little films. And he made a film of the Suicide Commandos. We had a rehearsal house that got condemned, and the fire department was going to burn it down. And so Chris, the guitar player, wrote a song called Burn It Down. And we recorded the song and then stood in front of the burning house and mimed the song as Chuck filmed it. And then through that Ohio connection, he put us in touch with Pere Ubu, and they took us under their wing, and we went and played with them in Cleveland. They were very good to us and very supportive. And through them, we met the people at Mercury Records that were starting the Blank record label. And Pere Ubu and Suicide Commandos were the first 2 signings to that label. And I think we were the only 2 bands to have an album come out on that label.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, we started in the fall of my long-winded answer to your question is we started in the fall of 75, and by the winter of 77 going into 78, we had a record deal.
Yes. But then
we were done by November of 78.
Well, when you brought out Make a Record, when you went to record that, what was the sort of the band? What sort of condition were the band in at that stage?
Very popular in Minneapolis. we had a regular club, the Longhorn, to play in, and we played all the time. And there was a huge gang of people that would come to every show and dance like crazy, and it was a real scene. And so we were, when we made that record, we were firing on all cylinders. We made that record in a very good studio, but we were novices, and so was the engineer and the producer. So it's not the most. It's pretty lo-fi.
Yes, absolutely. Because doing this show for quite a few years now, especially the 80s bands, there's kind of an interesting narrative of, there's the 5-year, they get together, they have that bit of honeymoon, practicing quite a lot for the first 12 months, and then get a single, which John Peel, this DJ, would sort of often give a spin to, which kind of gave people a John Peel session at the great BBC studios. And then there would be the first album, things are going well. And then the slightly tricky period where they do the second album, which often they haven't got the material, or, the dynamics of the band are changing. And then if they've got to the third album, it's often slightly over. But that is a bit simplistic, but I have noticed that. And also with a lot of English, British bands, if they ever tour America, that always seems to completely finish them off, because they just went, we came back and broke up. It just kind of finished us off. So with your band, you would sort of, it was very intense up to the sort of late 70s.
We kind of burnt out, I would say, in a way, just that we did what we were set out to do. I was really interested in moving to New York City. The other two band members were not. And it just, it reached a point quickly where we'd done what we could do. And they're just really, we broke up we played our last shows in November of 1978. And by the summer of 79, I was living in New York.
Yes. And at that stage, I mean, New York's got quite a sort of reputation, hasn't it? Apart from being financially kind of bankrupt and sort of almost left to the rats. But there was also the horrendous kind of drug scene and sort of a lot of people sort of struggling with that side of things, because everyone obviously didn't realize the damage it was going to take. I mean, how were you sort of navigating the great New York kind of scene at that stage?
Well, I was, out of no like nobility or anything on my part. For whatever reason, I certainly wasn't averse to drugs and alcohol, but I always had something that was more important to me, like music. Yes. And so it didn't really get in the way of that for me. And there was, the 80s in New York up to like 86, from 1979 to like 86 or 87 was just a golden time to be in a band in New York, because there were so many good places to play and they paid good money, because college kids could get into the clubs. You only had to be 18 or 19 to drink. And so all the kids from, Long Island and New Jersey and everywhere would pour into Manhattan, and they'd pour into these clubs, and they needed bands. They needed lots of bands to make all this music. And then they changed the drinking age to 21 and figured out they could pay DJs a lot less than they had to pay the bands. And that it kind of changed everything then. But there were, from like 79 to 86, 87, it was just a great time to be in a band in New York.
Why did they change the drinking age? Because I'd sort of heard about that, and I just thought,
I guess there were too many teenagers driving drunk was probably what they felt like,
Yes, that's quite a big thing, though, isn't it? To sort of suddenly put the age up by 3 years.
I mean, I think people get in the car here more than maybe they do in Europe, right?
Yes, possibly. There you go. Yeah, and also, I mean, because there was not just CBGBs, there was the Max's Kansas City, the Mud Club, Danceteria, and then there was the whole folk scene, because I know that people like Suzanne Vega and Lucy Kaplansky and Sean Colvin, they were all part of that other scene that was trying to make it, in
Steve
small...
Forbert, but yeah, there was Haraz and Danceteria and Peppermint Lounge and Tier 3. yeah, just a lot. The Lone Star. There was a lot of good clubs.
Yes. But then what was your next musical adventure
Well, I thrashed around for a few years. I came to New York with a band I'd put together called the Crackers, and that lasted about a year. But, with my Suicide Commandos credentials, we were able to start playing some good gigs pretty much right away. And then that did not last, though, either.
Oh, you've slightly frozen.
Just
oh, God.
Don't last. And can you hear me?
Yes, it was a little bit of a frozen moment, wasn't there? How annoying.
Am I
yes,
back?
You're back. Yes, you are back. Yeah, so with that one, the Crackers, you had, it was a 3-piece, wasn't it? And was that based from people from Minneapolis? Because you had Karen as well, didn't you?
Yes, those two were from Minneapolis. And then for a while, Mitch Eastaugh, we met Mitch Eastaugh, and he was in the band for a while, but then he decided to move back to North Carolina. And so we went down and made a little EP with him down there that turned out okay.
And is that Sir Crackers on?
It is, yes. Wow, not that many people heard of that.
But no, yes. But I've sort of, because Karen went on to be part of the band of Susans that we all
right,
which got picked up in the UK quite a lot and became such a sort of a cult classic, really, didn't it?
Yeah.
Let's face it. So there you go. But was that her first band that she was in?
No, she was in an all-girl band in Minnesota called Spitfire.
Right. Never heard of them.
Club band. No, they didn't make any records. Although she's got a cut on the Big Hits from Mid-America record with the singer from Spitfire and her under the name The Wad. And it's I actually play bass on it. But
right.
That was a good song. Somebody, I think Soul Asylum or somebody covered it. It was a good song.
Yes. So was it the case then that you were definitely looking at music as a sort of not just a hobby, but quite a career?
Absolutely. Then, yes.
So then, because the 80s, in the UK anyway, we'd had that sort of the punk, then post-punk, and then the world of indie pop started to be part of the scene. And obviously there was the mainstream charts with people like Trevor Horn and that, Duran Duran and Sade and Spandau Ballet. But then you had all the kind of the goth scene that started in the UK. Well, we had a goth scene and sort of psychobilly and anarcho-punk. And then obviously the Smiths came along in 83. So it's probably a little bit different in America. But what were your, you must have been...
Well, I drifted towards having this band beat Rodeo that, went through... It was always this guitar player, Bill Shunk, and then various other members came and went. And we got a record deal in Germany first. And we went over and played in Germany and Austria and Switzerland. And that led to a record deal in the States with IRS, the label REM and the Go-Go's. And
yes, did Mitch Copeland. He must have loved you.
Yeah. And
he's got a book out this year.
I will read that book. I will read too.
I did an interview with him. He's such a nice guy. And he actually managed Wishbone Ash. You mentioned him earlier. He's got some great stories, by the way.
Sure. So we, I think people would have called our music then like college rock, meaning that we got played on the college radio stations. There were college radio charts then. They probably, which I guess was probably the sort of US equivalent to the indie. They didn't really call it indie here. It would be like college. The British indie bands would be on the college radio chart.
Yeah, and the American college thing, though we didn't kind of understand it, but we probably nodded and pretended. But then slowly you realised this is where all the alternative stuff. So you'd get bands like Green on Red or 10,000 Maniacs or Jason and the Scorchers, and they might be giants. So that's Camper Van Beethoven. All those would have been college radio, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So with people like Green on Red, and they had that slightly organic kind of sound. Was there quite a scene that picked up on that? Because I did an interview recently with somebody I think he was a producer actually who'd worked with Suzanne Vega, but he was saying that in the 70s he'd spent most of his time he was in New York, but he did country and western. He said it was a big, you could play country and western and make a living from it in New York, which I was amazed by really, but there you go, true story.
Well, Beat Rodeo, we were very tight with Rank and File, that band with the Kinman brothers, and we were pretty tight with Jason and the Scorchers too, the Beat Farmers, Mojo Nixon, that was kind of the Del Lords. Well, that was kind of the crowd we were in.
Yes.
And
at that stage, I mean, and also if you're from the UK, I guess this could be the same with bands with Europe as well. We get very excited at trying to discover a new band. And if they're from America, we just, we automatically love it. So I'd imagine you would have got picked up quite a lot in, people like Melody Maker and the NME and probably not so.
The Germans liked us. The English were sort of indifferent. I don't know.
They loved Green on Red. They really, we went for Green on Red.
And the Long Riders. They loved the Long Riders too, right?
We did love the Long Riders. Yes, absolutely. So how did your band sort of develop during the 80s then?
We were like kings in New York, just living this great life, playing few gigs, at really good paying gigs a month and living here. And then we got the record deal and we went out, we toured. Our first record did pretty good. The second record kind of overshot its goals. The band got dispirited then and broke up again too. Again, it's just like probably within a 4 or 5 year period, and then it was that was that.
Yes, but you worked with some fantastic producers, didn't you, at that stage?
Richard Goddard, Don Dixon, Mitch Easter, Scott Litt. Yeah, we work with good people.
Amazing.
I stand behind those records. I like them,
Well, actually, yeah, I know. I mean, we're filled of nostalgia sometimes, aren't we? But it does, they do sound... I mean, it's kind of interesting. Your first band has that kind of real, like you said, Dr. Feelgood, and there was another band called 9 Below Zero and Ducks Deluxe, and anything on Stiff Records. Remember Stiff Records with Dave?
Sure.
Yeah, that had that kind of pub rock punk quality, didn't it? Really. So there you go. So why did the band finish then in the sort of the
IRS dropped us after the second record. We had a pretty good lawyer that negotiated our record deal, or so we thought. But the fact is, the amount of money that they would have had to pay us for a third album was more than they were prepared to pay. So that was that. And that kind of took the wind out of our sails.
Yes, I would imagine so. So then, we at that stage in the UK. I mean, I know I keep on about the UK, but I understand it better than the USA. But then by sort of the late 80s, because you probably realise that the way that every 5 years roughly, there's a new wave of 16 to 18-year-olds, and they kind of want their sound, don't they? And I sort of noticed that in the UK, a lot of those bands that I loved from the sort of 83 period, by 87 were getting pretty tired by their second or third albums and were splitting up. And then we had that kind of, the ecstasy world started to appear and new drugs, and everyone wanted to get very excited in clubs. I mean, not everybody was doing it, but there was definitely we need the Stone Roses, we got the Happy Mondays, the Primal Scream, Soup Dragons, all that kind of scene. And then it was the orb started to appear. And then obviously you had the Seattle grunge scene, and there was also various other, shoegazing was kind of another thing that happened. So what was your kind of next musical step in?
Well, I went for a good long time without, I'd had a couple of very good grabs at the brass ring that hadn't really, taken me to the next level. So I was kind of, after Beat Rodeo broke up, I got a solo album deal with Rough Trade America, and actually recorded an album, and then they folded before the album could come out.
Is
So
this East River
East River
Blues?
Blues, yeah.
That's got a great cover. It's got a great sound.
And that record sat in the can for a while. I started doing this local Monday night thing down in the East Village that got very, very popular, and with the bunch of the different versions of Beat Rodeo guys playing in, and anybody that came through town would come and sit in with us. Everybody from Alex Chilton to David Johansen to Lucinda Williams to even Mickey Dolenz came once, and we had this very nice, we're just kind of living and not forgetting about a career for a while. But I had this album, and one night this Swedish fella comes in to listen to the band, and I'm outside taking a break, and he walks up and he goes, "Hi, my name's Ingmar Magnusson. What are you doing, like, record-wise these days?" And I said, "Well, I have this record in the can." A nice thing about the Rough Trade thing folding, I did get to keep the record.
Right.
I didn't lose, I didn't lose the record. I had the record. That was good. And Ingram, he said, "Well, I'd like to hear it, and if I like it, I'd like to put it out." And so this guy from Borlänge, Sweden, this like working class town in Sweden, basically, I guess that was in like 92. He's been putting records out for me for the last, for the last 30 years.
Oh, right. Is this Lonesome
Whippoorwill? A few of their records came out in the States on a label called Parasol as well.
Right.
But Ingmar has been putting them out all this time. And, he put out the one I did this year, the Everywhere You've Been. And
yes, he's been your
he's been my mentor. Yeah.
He has basically
he's kept my foot in the he's kept my big toe in making music. I never lost interest in making music, but I stopped like trying to make a living at it.
Yes, well, I think this is where a lot of people realize that must be fantastic to have somebody who's almost like become a patron of the arts.
It is, and the record we did this year really felt like it was the culmination of something. Like all the gods were with us with this one, and everything just came. I'm really, really happy with this album, and do feel like it's sort of I got to put a little bit of everything I learned over the years into one album, and it was this one,
Yes, well, I've been also listening to the solo work. So was this an album that you were started writing during the wonderful world that was lockdown, or had you been writing it before?
No, it was written. Some of the songs were, probably about half the songs were written right before the pandemic, and the other half had been just kind of percolating the last 3 or 4 years before that.
Yes. And also with this one, you've got a big kind of musical kind of band with you, haven't you? You brought in a lot.
I got really good people playing on the drummer is actually my soon-to-be son-in-law. He's a drummer named TJ Mayani, he's a jazz drummer, but he plays with Steve Gunn and a bunch of other people too. And TJ brought Tony, sorry, I'm having a senior moment here. Tony Garnier into the project because Tony plays stand-up bass in TJ's jazz trio.
Right.
And, so yeah, we had Tony Garnier, who's Bob Dylan's musical director, playing stand-up, and Mark Sidgwick, who was in Holly and the Italians and a bunch of other things too, and John Graboff, who was in Ryan Adams and the Cardinals, and Gary Lewis sings harmony on a song from the Jayhawks, and Rebecca Sagestad, who I met up in Beacon, New York, who was quite the pop star in Norway. I was surprised and delighted to discover she and another woman, fantastic woman, Daria Grace, did a lot of the heavy lifting on the background vocals. And so, yeah, it was quite a group of people. Kenny Vaughn from Marty Stewart's band. And yeah, it was, I just, got a lot of my old pals to come in and play on it. And
when did you go into the studio to record it?
Let's see. I think we started in summer of 2019.
Right.
Yeah.
Blimey.
And did like, bass, drums, and rhythm guitar, scratch vocals and stuff first. And then I would work on it with the various people that were called into the project.
God, that must be, that must have been a nice kind of project to have started and then sort of had to sort of work through during this last 18 months, actually.
It's really good.
Because it has been a bit tricky, but it does sound amazing. And it's great that you've, do you just find it's so much kind of more simple to be the musical drive or the musical kind of director to these things rather than trying to sort of figure out how to put a band, together?
Yes, I've got my sea legs for producing my own music. Yes, I feel really good about that. Especially when I have Mitch Eastaugh engineering and mixing. And we worked in a very good studio in Brooklyn in New York called Cowboy Technical Services, where the engineer, Mario Viella, really good engineer too. And yeah, I mean, if you're working with good people, they make you look good. They make you sound good.
Yes, but it must be funny to sort of know that the band that you were in the mid 70s for those 3 years is you still get sort of quite a lot of publicity for as well, don't you? And sort of
I'm playing a gig with them on New Year's Eve,
which is quite amazing, isn't it? And because during the 80s, I suppose there was my obsession with music was kind of like obsessive, really. Even Hüsker Dü was that band that I sort of for a couple of years played constantly in that way that you do, and went to try and see them at Glastonbury and Kilburn in London, and went on to follow Bob Mould in various solo ones. So you must have feel quite chuffed that a lot of these people were influenced and had been inspired by you.
Yeah, it's great. I really admire Bob, everything about the way he's comported himself in his career. I think that's like a guy that there's a template for doing it right. That guy did it right. And, he keeps making good music. I like, being the age I am, I still want to hear original music from my peers, and luckily that's been a really good thing about the internet world and all of that there is an audience of people of my generation that still want to hear original music from people of my generation. And that, keeps a lot of us going.
Yes, because you're slightly not unusual, but a lot of people that I've interviewed definitely had a break, for quite a few years, decades, let's face it. They've gone on and done, got jobs, had to sort of do the family stuff and house stuff and kids stuff, and then have come back to music quite recently and have kind of not reformed the band, but have sort of brought either a solo project or sort of various members that they've played with before and have started writing new material. And their feeling, from speaking to them, is to keep it much more kind of low, having a much more sort of limited release, whereas you've never stopped playing music and releasing material, have you?
No, it's really at the core of who I am. I just do it because I need to.
which is
even though I work at such a slower level than I would if that was it would be great if I could get up every day and that's all I had to think about was music, but that's not how it is. And so I'm really comfortable with, the timeline I'm on for, it always just sits in the back of my mind, of writing another song. And when I have 12 of them, I'll make another album.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's where I'm blessed. I have somebody that will put one on, put them out when I'm ready to make one too.
I think that's kind of such kind of genius, really, isn't it? Because I think that's the bit that's kind of gives everyone the frozen kind of like, oh, where do I go next and what do I do? And you just want to do it, and then someone else take care of the admin. Let's face it.
Yeah.
When you did two albums with Ali Smith, didn't you?
I did.
So what was that kind of musical sort of?
We were in a relationship together, and I adored Ali, and we were on a vacation once, and there was a guitar along, and we started just kind of singing some songs for fun. And I thought it would be really great to just like make a record of duets. And then with, I don't know. I guess I just looked at that as sort of a musical gift I could give to her. It was to arrange that to get that done, and especially the first one that was really fun to make. It was a very pleasant record, and the covers we did I really liked, and she sang a couple of old songs of mine, which that was very pleasurable for me too, to hear somebody else sing them. And the second record was not quite as happy because between the making and release of the record, we broke up. So that was a little more bittersweet, but I like that record too.
Yes, which is, that's kind of probably gives you great material for sort of future songs, really. And trailers and the album Trailer Songs, is that one that you've got fond memories of? Because again, that's kind of got a fantastic production sound and quality.
Yeah, that was, I have an Airstream trailer in my backyard with my little home studio in, and my home studio is very rudimentary, but what I can record keeper vocals, and I can record like keeper acoustic instruments, like an acoustic guitar or like the ukulele. On part of the ukulele on the new record was done out there, and a lot of my vocals were done out there too. And so that record was kind of based around I was messing around with guitar tunings and finger picking and stuff. So a lot of the songs were based around that and done in that trailer. So that's why I called it Trailer Songs.
Yes. And you've always had great album covers, haven't you? You've always done.
Well, I have some good people there too. The photographer, Bobby Fisher, has taken a lot of photos of me over the years that have been used in this and that. He did the cover for the Trailer Songs record, and he took the portrait and kind of sketched out the idea for the cover for Everywhere You've Been too. But yeah, he's given me that better than real life look.
Yes, it suits the music. Because I suppose what was quite interesting kind of recently, I've done quite a few interviews with, people who'd, I suppose had been sort of connected with the Suzanne Vega, moment, like, we talked about singer-songwriters earlier, and, just playing, her acoustic guitar, then think, oh, we might do an album with, Lenny Kaye had produced that one as well.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like, oh my God, it didn't sell like 10 or 20,000. It's kind of gone massive, and you've become this star. And then you do a follow-up and then a follow-up. And then, obviously things start to trail off again. I mean, with your kind of musical kind of journey, has it sort of been quite interesting sort of looking back and seeing, the rise and fall of these kind of moments? And I just wonder how you sort of navigate those kind of...
Absolutely. It was, from Beat Rodeo to those... The two records I did with Ali got really nice attention. Actually, the solo record called King Go a Wild One before, in the 90s, I couldn't get arrested. No one wanted to know. But then in the 2000s, I got nice response to that King Go a Wild One record and those two records I did with Ali. And then this one this year, we got a very good publicist for this record, and the attention I got for it. And I think maybe people being stuck at home in the pandemic in a weird way kind of helped that too, because they needed something to listen to at home. And we just did really well with this one on the level I'm working at, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you I mean, you mentioned that you're going to be playing on New Year's Eve, I think, isn't it, with your first band? But is it the case that you sort of take these albums out and sort of your back catalog?
We did a lovely record release gig in Woodstock for Everywhere You've Been, where the core band came and played. John, the pedal steel and guitar player, lives in Santa Fe, and he came. And TJ, the drummer, came up from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And then everybody else was kind of in the Catskills area there. And we just had a fantastic gig. It was bittersweet in that there was only one. We were going to do a show with Gary Louris that got canceled because of COVID, but we might do some, Gary's a friend and a supporter. We might do some shows with either the Jayhawks or Gary solo coming up, and we'll probably do a couple things around the Woodstock area.
Yes. And after New Year's Eve, what are your plans for sort of 2022?
Write some more songs.
Get the next album sort of.
Write some more songs. I've been talking with Ingmar. We might do some kind of retrospective release too. There's a couple of the records that he put out that were never released in the States. And I don't know what he has in mind. I would like to do sort of a pick tracks from all the records kind of compilation thing. Maybe like a double album that way, or, CD double album that way, or I don't know, but there'll probably be some sort of retrospective. And I want to, if this pandemic ever really ends, there'll definitely be more live shows. Vibeke and Daria live pretty close to me, and they will be at the core of whatever live thing I'm doing next. There'll be a lot of vocals.
Yes. Has New York slightly come back to some sort of, not normality, but something that feels a bit more like this is going to be?
To me, it's a little grim right now. It's a little dirty and a little down at the heel. It's definitely doing better, but it's not back.
Yes. Strange, isn't it?
I don't think it'll be back really till the masks can come off, and I hope that's soon.
Yes. Yes, I'm completely lost about whether you're supposed to be wearing masks in the UK or not. I think people have just to be honest, the UK is slightly given up. It's like just.
Well, did you get a booster?
No, but I've just booked my booster for 2 weeks' time. So
I think after you have the booster, you're pretty good. I've heard of plenty of people that have had the 2 vaccinations that got breakout COVID, but I haven't heard of anybody that's had the booster that got breakout COVID. And I work in a school full of 500 unvaccinated children, so I made sure I got that booster before I went back into the building this year, and knock on wood, so far so good.
Well, that's yes. If you manage to survive kids, then I think you're pretty good. Actually, it would be good anyway. If you were able to sort of give your like your 16, 18-year-old self a little bit of kind of worldly advice, is there anything that you would have, with all the decades and all the different musical combos you've been in and albums, is there anything that you would have just sort of whispered in their ear just to say, look, you might ignore this, but I'd just say that, this is worth remembering or worth doing or worth not doing?
I think I would have paid more attention to the business. Part of like what when I said I admire Bob Mould so much is like, I know he took care of himself that way always, and was in charge of in charge of that. And I was not like that. And there are various points where had I been a little bit more like that, I don't know. I wouldn't have life be any different than it. Life is very good right now. I wouldn't want to do anything to make it not be like it is right now. So
yes. Is it?
I can't.
I mean, with the music business, is it the case then that it's just very complicated, and you've really got to pay attention and know what to look out for? I mean, because everybody I speak to is going, "Oh God, that side is just grim." But
yeah, for me, it worked. There was a point where if you would have asked me, "What are you trying to achieve?" I would have said, "I would like the success of somebody like Tom Petty." That guy made good records till the day he died. He was very popular, could always play big, had a huge audience, could play big shows, kept writing music, that's another, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the way they operated their music and their everything, I really admire. And, at the point where, there was a point where I just knew that was not the way it was going to go for me. And so I think it just needed to go the way it did.
Yes. Were you disappointed?
And I'm good with that. I'm really, like I said, I made a record this year I'm really happy with, and hope to make another one.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, actually, having gone through those two kind of three bands and then getting a solo career does sound like you've met. Yeah, it's a good place to be, isn't it? Where you can just take charge and think, you're not having to negotiate with people, and it's often quite hard work, and then ends in tears often. But then you must have a nice relationship with your, the first band, Suicide Commandos.
Yeah. And you know what? If you get to wake up and think about music every day in this world, in your life, that's very lucky.
This is very true, actually. Well, look. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Steve for giving me the time for that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he's been in quite a lot of bands, Beat, Rodeo, the Suicide Commandos, and quite a few of other little combos. This has been a C86 show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show and you will find me somewhere lurking there. All these interviews have been archived, so you can find those on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. It's all true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.